And you can answer with either privatized, a combination of both, or socialized, or to the people. It's not a very complicated, and we usually bumble through it. So first off, prisons.
Those should be, there's a lot of work we need to do there. I'm definitely an advocate for smart justice, so I'm going to say it needs to be run by the state. So I'm against privatized prisons. So it needs to be run by the state, but we also need to not make incarceration be the way that we address the majority of crimes.
Great answer. Schools.
Public.
Oh, and Courtney came in. Would you like to see the list?
Oh, are you already going through the list?
I'm starting right off.
Yeah, he just cut right into it as I was going live. So yeah.
Okay.
So we did prisons, and then we're on schools.
All right. Well, we'll go with schools.
I'm proud to have the backing of all the teachers unions. I'm definitely a public school supporter.
Excellent. And just pulling up my copy of the list here. Go ahead. What's the next one, Brian?
Healthcare.
Team single payer. Public.
Nice. Go for it, Brian. I'll jump in when I find it.
No problem. Postal Service.
I'll definitely keep that public. In fact, we should expand it. I think we need to be using it also for local banking in the community.
Yeah.
Love that idea.
Nice. Yep.
Utilities.
Public or owned by the people.
Water.
Public, owned by the people.
Banks.
Team State Bank. I love the work that Senator Kuderer has done to move Hasagawa's plan forward for State Bank.
Public lands and natural resources.
Absolutely keep those public. That's our heritage.
Yeah. Infrastructure, roads, bridges.
Absolutely keep that public, and we need to be leveraging something like a state bank to bond against to actually improve and invest in our crumbling infrastructure.
Social Security.
Keep it public, save it.
Military and its associated industrial complexes.
I think it's a shame when we pay our contractors more than we pay our troops that are serving the people. We need to definitely keep that public.
Foster care.
We need to keep that public, and frankly, we need to do a lot of investment to address the lack of services and the fact that there's just not enough support for foster families.
Absolutely. Healthcare.
Already answered that, but just again, public option.
I need to scroll down.
Team single payer.
Internet and cell service.
Absolutely for community-owned broadband and whatever we need to do for that.
I feel fortunate enough to have municipal broadband here in the east side of the state. It's kind of nice. Should be the entire state, in my opinion.
Yes.
Mass transit, airways, railways, ferries.
Absolutely keep it public for the people and more investment.
Okay. Libraries.
Keep it public.
Childcare.
I would say a mix or a hybrid, but we definitely need more affordable healthcare or more childcare options.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons I'm able to do this. I'm a stay-at-home dad, so I can relate big time with that one. Space exploration.
I don't think I get to touch that at the state level, but I definitely think that is something we need to continue to invest in and do a hybrid.
Scientific funding.
Hybrid.
Elections.
Keep it public for the people, and let's get more paper ballots across the state, or across the country, I mean.
Right. First responders.
Keep it public.
Veterans Administration.
Again, I think that's something I don't touch at the state level, but I'm definitely for continued investment in public.
Social services.
Social services are essential, and we need to keep investing in there and keep it public.
Okay. Oh. Community housing.
I would definitely say hybrid. We need an all hands on deck kitchen sink approach.
And then I would like Courtney to ask the caregivers, because she's wonderful at this part.
All right. So we have we're developing an idea called the caregiver's basic income. So anybody who cares for, say, a child under 8, or someone who is elderly and aging, or someone who's disabled, instead of having to juggle all their responsibilities and a job or jobs, we feel that they should receive a caregiver's basic income that also accrues Social Security benefits. What are your feelings on that idea?
I would absolutely love to do a study on what that would cost and what we need to do. I'm someone that here's a personal story. My stepdad was disabled in a train accident with Burlington Northern. And while I was in grad school, and shortly after, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So while I'm a single mom going to grad school, I also was the caregiver to 2 sick parents. And in order to do that, I had to max out my student loan. So I'm $250,000 in student loan debt, because that was literally what kept us afloat. So what I see is that we absolutely need to figure out and value those services and see what we can do, because that is a huge sacrifice that family members or friends or you name it make in order to take care of someone. And we need to figure out what we need to do, because it causes real economic hardship to take that time off of work to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And so concludes the list.
Erin has her hand up. Erin, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question, and I just wanted to preface it that I'm really excited that Jessa is running in my neighboring district. So I'm excited to expand this little blue dot over here. But I have a tough question, because I believe our job as voters is to push our legislators to talk about the tough issues. And during the I-1600 signature gathering and early phases, we were a bit hesitant to support. And as I understand, it was primarily the tax structure. And so I wanted to just address that. I know you're a huge supporter of universal health care and 1026, which is and the sister bill. And I know that we use that for the basis for our proposal in I-1600. But Vermont passed a single payer that didn't have a funding structure, and neither does 1026. And that kind of meant that it never got established. So knowing that universal healthcare isn't going to be funded by fairy dust, I'm wondering what kind of tax proposals and exemption proposals you are thinking will be the baseline for establishing universal healthcare here in Washington.
Excellent. Well, I definitely appreciate the question and all the work that you did on pushing this movement forward. As far as the tax structure, we're in the middle of, so the organization that I work for is in the middle of 2 studies. One is a funding structure and actually seeing what that would look like. And then the other is an implementation study on how it needs to be structured. And for me, I just would like to have more answers on what that would look like. I know here in Eastern Washington, an income tax is a tough sell. So I signed at 1600 because I wanted the voters to have a chance to make that decision ultimately at the ballot box. But I also know that the majority of constituents that I've talked to, and I've been asking them on the doors, are concerned about what an income tax would mean for them. And I know where you have the cost calculator and we're able to show that for most families it'd be a savings. But that's the thing, is it's going to take a lot of convincing and data and facts, if that is the case, to show that that is true. And so that is something that I personally want. So I had hesitations, I had concerns. Ultimately, I would love to use the actual data and studying resources to be able to show whatever funding mechanism we end up going with to make our bill stronger, because you're right, without a funding mechanism or without that fiscal note attached, the legislature can just sweep it under the rug. And so the bill we had that we ran with last session in Olympia that 1600 was based on was imperfect. But that is something to where we're hoping to have a better one where we can have that last half dozen votes with putting a little bit more work into the structure. And so I'm excited to see what the results of that study are. And we should have it within the next month or so, from what I understand.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So one thing that I'm
May I quickly interject? I feel it's connected.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
because I was going off subject. So go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So with the tax issues, the financial study, economist study, sorry, it's early, was done, and the financing of I-1600 was proposed the way it was because of the limitations within our state constitution. Are you willing to review our state constitution and perhaps make amendments, build a group of like-minded state legislators to move to an improved state constitution, one that maybe has a fair tax system?
Well, the thing that I think that we can all agree on is the tax system in Washington State is broken. It disproportionately impacts the retired, working families, you name it, that we're bearing the brunt of the tax burden with being the most progressive in the country. So we absolutely need to do something. And there is multiple work groups, both in the legislature and All In for Washington, which are looking at what we need to do in order to fix that tax structure. And I'm absolutely on the team of whatever we need to do. I know one of the things that we're looking at doing to relieve the tax burden is funding the working families tax credit. It was passed in 2008, was never funded. And what it would do would essentially, for anyone who is eligible for earning the earned income tax credit federally, that there would be a tax rebate. And they're looking at even doing that rebate monthly. And with such a thing, then we can look at some of the other mechanisms for funding for healthcare or you name it, because ultimately we need to relieve the burden on families who are struggling and can't afford to pay anything more. So whatever tools we have at our disposal, I'm absolutely going to be looking at and considering.
Thank you. Rhonda, you're muted.
Yep, I'm muted. I'm sorry. I was all talking away. So a big thing that I'm behind is Represent Us, and it is part of our questionnaire. And I see that you were asking how you would look at signing that. So I'll make sure I send you some information on that. But I want to have you talk about how your race is being funded.
Absolutely. So I don't have the exact figures, but I know the majority of my opponent's money are all coming I think it's like 60 or 70% is corporate PACs. I think I'm at 70 to 80 individual donors. The rest are unions. And that is essentially where all my money is coming from. It's small dollar donations. It is frustrating how much time I need to spend fundraising and dialing for dollars instead of talking to voters. And frankly, the people who often fund progressive campaigns, their phones blow up. And it is not a pleasant experience for them. I've seen several complaints posted on Facebook just because the numbers, their phones basically ringing from all these candidates trying to make it and trying to compete with the corporate money. So I'm absolutely for whatever we need to do in order to shorten the election season, to take the money out of it to where we can actually just have a discussion on the issues versus having to pay for these massive campaigns and mailers and everything else that has muddied the waters in our political system.
Beautiful. So you're for publicly funded, shorter races.
Whatever we
Yep.
need to do in order to get money out and to actually have a discussion of the ideas.
Beautiful. What do you think about, so a part of it too is election reform. What do you think about like a ranked choice voting system or a scored voting system to help open up to newcomers and third parties a chance to garner some votes?
I am for whatever gives more voice and control of the democracy to the people, because there's been such massive disenfranchisement when over half the people sometimes don't even participate because they don't see a reason for them to. I'm for all of what we're able to do with the Voting Rights Act we were able to pass last session in Olympia, and think we need to continue leading the way in the state of Washington.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anybody have another question? So I don't just keep going. Oz has joined us now. Oz, do you have a question? He's getting there. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, now you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, Jessa, thank you for coming to this interview. I've followed you on Facebook for quite a while now. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you think you are a 10 as far as the progressive, 10 being highest? Or do you think you're kind of like in the middle as far as working with establishment and reaching across the aisle? Or how would you describe that? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. As far as where I am on the scale, I don't see it being a single axis scale. There's some items where it comes to healthcare, I'm on the left of the spectrum. And there's other items such as guns, like I have a concealed carry permit. So I'm a little bit more in the middle and going to be able to bring consensus across the aisle. Eastern Washington definitely has a unique perspective and voice. And I feel like I'm someone that matches up with my district. It's a true swing district. It's 50-50. And so I think that I'm going to be in a position to push for a progressive agenda, but at the same time, be pragmatic and represent the voters in my district and what they're asking me to push for.
Okay, thank you. I'm very cautious of that term pragmatic because I hear that from establishment-leaning Democrats on a regular basis. But how you parsed the answer was very good, and I do appreciate that. I must say we're kind of in a little battle right now as far as progressives and centrists. And I have to stick with the progressive side because in the end, it's going to go farther left instead of keep moving the goalposts to the right, which the centrists have been doing for a long time. But thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. Rhonda, back to you.
I can actually continue a little bit more on that. So I'm someone who has support and endorsements from Democrats and Republicans. And frankly, the only way to win this district is someone who can work with everyone. And the way to get legislation passed is to find that path to 50% plus one. As a former Republican, I understand some of the mindsets, and a lot of times the issues that get in the way is a matter of language or presentation of the ideas. You know, when I worked for sustainability at Joint Base Lewis McChord, we called it energy security. And that's the thing, is oftentimes people get caught up on the language, and I don't care why someone will move to address issues with climate change, like changing our light bulbs or use different fuel. We may have different reasons for why we do that. You know, for them, it may be cost savings, or, you know, and again, with Joint Base Lewis McChord, it was about battlefield readiness. But the fact is I don't care why we do it. The issues are crucial, and we need to find that common ground with everybody, because we need to be moving the ball down the field. And that's something that's, so when I say pragmatic, that's what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's language, sometimes it's finding partnerships and working across the aisle to get things done. You know, for example, with the healthcare bill, I had 8 Republicans willing to vote on a single payer healthcare bill in the state of Washington. And the reason why they're willing to do that is they have these rural critical care hospitals that are on the verge of closure. And in order to keep them open, we either need to raise taxes or find efficiencies. And you know, with the single payer system, that will save money. So for them, that was why they were willing to work with me. And I think ultimately that's the kind of approach we need to take to get things done in Olympia.
Thanks, Jessa.
Thank you very much. Sorry. So going in, what kind of policies are you most excited about working on? And are you looking at writing any yourself? And if so, what?
Definitely. Well, the vast majority of the things that I'm going to be prioritizing are projects that have been underfunded or not handled in my district. For example, in the West Plains, there was contamination of the aquifer. So the city of Airway Heights does not have access to their own water. They're having to buy water from Spokane. Spokane doesn't have sufficient water to sell them. So we're in a position to where we need to figure out what we're doing long-term in order to secure the well-being of the fastest growing municipality in the state. And so that is something to where I think we need to address infrastructure. They don't have, or we need to build more schools. For example, the kids in a portion of my district are riding a bus an hour one way, and these are kindergartners to high schoolers on the same bus, and these roads get very dangerous in the winter. So a lot of it is going to be things that are kitchen table issues that directly impact the needs of the folks in my district, because frankly, the infrastructure has been left to rot and there hasn't been enough investment. Again, I'm going to be pushing for finally getting the healthcare bill passed. We were a half dozen votes away. I'm hoping with a stronger bill, I'll be there to be in the caucus and pushing and meeting with them every day in order to get that done. I also believe that we need to be looking at ways of stretching taxpayer money to where we can do more with less. And that is, again, where something like a state bank would come in to where we can bond against it for these infrastructure projects and actually potentially make the state money in some instances without raising taxpayer revenue, because a lot of people are struggling right now. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it all comes down to actually representing working families who have been left behind in this growing income inequality. So whatever I can do to make it easier on families who are working, on folks who want to retire with dignity, those are going to be the main issues that I'm going to be championing. So they may not be these big, broad projects. So I think healthcare and state bank is going to be quite a bit to push, but definitely anything that I can do in order to make life better for the people I represent in the state is absolutely someone to push for.
Great, thank you. Brian, do you have? Yep, I saw your hand.
So you mentioned water, and I recently just moved to the eastern part of the state. I'm in Moses Lake, and water is huge. Like it's the one thing that keeps us here, right? And water is life, of course. What sort of things can you do to protect the water that we have and possibly even raise these levels? Because even over here in Moses Lake, the city council is deemed that the wells in the water are actually below the level they're supposed to be.
Absolutely. Well, water is important to me. I made a total of 3 trips with my daughter to Standing Rock to stand with the tribes and to support their effort in that message in 2016. So I guess there's a couple of issues. One, we have contaminated water, be it in our lakes or in our aquifer, that we absolutely need to look at cleaning up. Then it's also conservation and use. Just like we had a potential thing that I'm looking at is like how we had the solar incentives. I think we need to have water conservation incentives to where we make it easier for families to afford to install, gray water systems, the toilets or low flow toilets and shower heads, that if we can have something like that to where if we're using less to start with, then we can make the resources we have go further. I definitely support efforts at WSU and other land grant universities that are working on agriculture to see what we can do with growing crops using less water, because agriculture is ultimately one of the largest uses of the water. Definitely, I think it's kind of again, it's a kitchen sink approach. I think it's a yes and everything that we can do in order to protect, to clean up, to conserve, and to better use the water that we already have. Because frankly, it means resiliency for our communities. It's food security. It's security with the changing climate that we may not know what'll happen to our water flows. And we need to actually better monitor. I know with the Hearst decision, there was a lot of battle back and forth on water use. And I think we need to better monitor the water that we have in order to know what we have, to where we don't set up a situation to where someone who's essentially upstream uses up all the water and then the land's worthless because there's no water flowing under that. We saw that in New Mexico, and it impacted a lot of families and landowners. And I think that we need to be proactive in this.
And you mentioned crops, and what's your view on industrial hemp and the recreational marijuana industry?
I'm glad you asked. I actually helped launch the 502 industry in Seattle. I was the general manager of Dockside Cannabis, and we were the first to pay our employees a living wage. And that became the norm in the area, to where bud tenders and people working in the cannabis industry were paid at least $15 an hour. I definitely see it should not be a Schedule I drug. We need to figure out the tax structure. It's overly taxed. and maybe make it more in line with what they're doing in Colorado as far as the tax system. But definitely with hemp, there's a lot that we can do as far as it is a fiber for clothing, for paper, you name it. And in addition to all the medicinal uses for it. So I'm absolutely someone who am anti-cannabis prohibition.
Wonderful. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, so we were talking about, police reform in our endorsement form, and how we did have some of the campaign zero proposals passed, but with 940 with all going on, how can you see we can go further? Do you support, so 940 is supposed to be back on the ballot? Did you come out in support of that? Do you see where we can do better? Where are some issues where you think that you can champion within the Senate?
Absolutely. So I actually worked on signature gathering and training in support of it for 940. That's something to where I believe we need to return to more of a community policing model. Because when you have a situation where people of color and immigrants do not feel safe going to the police for fear of deportation or injury or harm to themselves or others, that ultimately makes communities less safe, because then they aren't reporting on what's happening. So if there's someone they know there's a domestic abuse or a drug den next door, it's not reported to the police because people don't feel like they're safe. And so I think getting away from this militarization and more towards rebuilding the trust in between the police who are there to serve and the community that is there is ultimately, I think, what we need to get to. And I think 940 did a good job as far as getting all the stakeholders on board, especially, I'm proud of the work that they did. I'm happy that I had a very small role in it, very minute, and I wish it had been more. But I think that's definitely a direction that we need to head, because proving malice is tough, and we need to figure out how to address that and get away from this escalation that we're seeing in our communities, and also ultimately keep police officers safe, because they are serving and doing a tough job. And so we need to figure out that balance.
I have a quick question. I have a friend who grew up in Spokane and in his adulthood had moved to the west side, but spent a lot of time going back and forth. So he had community in both places. Mm-hmm. He recently passed away from a heroin overdose. And while I'm not sure that he would have survived, I think he would not have been alone in his room. He was not on the streets, but he was alone in his room. And I believe he aspirated on his vomit, something to that effect. What are your feelings about safe consumption sites? Are you familiar with the idea?
Yeah. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm for harm reduction. And that is a model that has worked. It's by criminalizing people who are addicted does not make our community safer. And ultimately, it results in throwing lives away. And so whatever we need to do in order to treat addiction more like a mental health issue and get people to where they're safe and can get the treatment that they need in order to get better is definitely something that we need to be working towards, because this war on drugs is not working. It's costing money, it's costing lives.
Excellent.
And I'm very sorry for your loss, and we need to do better.
Thank you. And then I'm in Tacoma, and Tacoma has a disproportionate number of sexual predators, because when the state releases predators, no matter where they came from, they're most often deposited in Pierce County because we have the resources. Would you support diversifying resources across the state so that we all are proportionately inundated with sexual predators?
I was not aware of that, and I would love to get some more information, because ultimately we need, as a survivor myself, we need to figure out what we need to do in order to respect people's individual civil liberties, but at the same time keep communities safe. So we'd love to follow up on that further.
Excellent, thank you.
So in our questionnaire as well, we asked how you support or initiate legislation to create and protect a just path to citizenship. As you said, it's not necessarily what you do at the state level. But it kind of is as far as sanctuary cities or sanctuary states or anything like that. How do you feel about giving sanctuary to what's going on right now out there, to people who are afraid of being deported or put in internment camps?
I am so, as a person of faith, I am concerned, disgusted, scared at the immoral attack on individuals. I would personally cross 1,000 borders to keep my daughter safe. And when we also have a situation where the local police are doing the federal government's job, it erodes trust in policing. It is not reimbursed, so it's a further drain on cities' resources that they cannot absorb, that then gets taken away from addressing local crimes. So I mean, there's just so many things down the list. So it's about there's things that if the law is broken, the law is broken, and then we can address it then. But this whole checking people's papers, and Spokane's one of the cities, or my district's within the 100-mile buffer zone, where people's constitutional rights are somewhat eroded. Someone can just ask for your papers, and that is something that concerns me. And we absolutely need to move forward in a constitutional matter and respect people's individual rights, and at the same time, finally address this immigration and figure out what we need to do in order to get people out of the shadows, because when they're undocumented, they could be further victimized. And oftentimes these are people who are leaving horrible situations, and unless you're native, you're an immigrant to this country. And I think that's something that we definitely need to address.
In addition to that, it kind of has a crossover, because currently we have an immigration prison in the Port of Tacoma, and it's a for-profit prison. So whether it be immigration or just our citizens themselves, how do you feel about for-profit prisons, and what would you do in our state?
Well, I think in a for-profit prison, you're maximizing return to your shareholders. And that's to where you're not focused on, like, that becomes your mission versus rehabilitating someone. And with that situation, there's also a incentive to keep people in prison, to keep them, to not reduce the recidivism rate, but increase it, because then that's more money and more profit. And that's something that makes no sense to me. We incarcerate more than anyone else in the world. And furthermore, then when they get out, then they've got a stigma. So I'm proud for the work that I'm doing with Tara Simmons and Pavey, other formerly incarcerated folks who are working to change the system. And I look forward to working with them in order to pass bills that are actually going to make people's lives better and to make communities safer.
Thank you very much.
I have one more. So I've recently learned that the west side of the state has been incentivizing homeless people to move to the east side of the state by giving them bus tickets and such. What sort of homelessness issues are in the Spokane area, as opposed to, I'm in Moses Lake, so they just give them a bus ticket and ship them over here? Have you encountered that problem in Spokane? And if so, what kind of solutions would you be able to bring to the table?
Well, I definitely, as I don't know if you know, but at one point in my life, my daughter and I were living in a car together. So this is something that is personal. And it wasn't until I had stable housing was I able to get a job, to go back to school, to do the things in order to move my life forward. And now I have a master's degree. And I think that we need to get away from this stigma. If it's poor, it's something you did. That it has to be your own fault, because the reality is as you know, there's flaws in our economic system, and it could be, you know, a mental health issue. It could be a medical bill. Who knows why someone is in that situation? So I'm definitely for a housing first model. And we also need to do more investment into the prevention of homelessness and stabilize people who are already in housing, because ultimately that's less taxpayer money because it's a little bit more work to get someone stable once they've already lost their housing. So whatever we need to do, I know there's a growing homeless issue and people are also being displaced from Idaho and other areas to where, because there's no services whatsoever. So I think we need to figure out not just a statewide solution, but also a regional solution because we need to handle and take care of the people in our own community versus send them elsewhere, because that's the thing is like you're just sweeping the problem under the rug and it's not actually helping people.
Right.
Throwing them away.
Would you support a federal or statewide jobs program?
Absolutely, for both. And that's something to where I think the infrastructure projects can be a jobs program. Frankly, the more trade unions I speak to, the more I hear that there's a shortage of people actually going for those jobs. And there's people that we can put to work today. And I am beyond impressed by the work with people who are either currently or formerly incarcerated to get them trained in the trades and to get them placed in work. And the fact that with these unions, there's a support network that's there. And I have met so many people who are a part of apprenticeships who have come from some rough backgrounds, but are now on a pathway to becoming self-sufficient. And I think definitely jobs bring dignity. We don't want handouts. We want the chance to provide for ourselves and to be proud of the work that we do. So whatever we need to do with that jobs program versus, and even I'd love to see a little bit more of the money that goes to TANF actually go towards maybe something like what Germany does with an employment first model, to where there's a job ready and waiting versus just giving a little bit of money that's not enough for people to actually get by.
Wonderful, thank you. I would also add that to incentivize more of the green energy infrastructure as well. And with
Absolutely.
the solar panels and the wind and all of the wonderful resources that are over here in Eastern Washington, we could totally capitalize on creating jobs in a field that we absolutely need anyway. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it doesn't just create jobs, it also has an economic multiplier, because then that's money that's in the community that then supports service workers and you name it. And then it's also makes communities more resilient because they're self-reliant, because they can generate their own energy, you name it. Absolutely.
You said something about regional solutions, and I was wondering if you were familiar with the term bioregion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Well, then that's enough. I like to think of the world as divided into bioregions. It's less man-made and arbitrary. So thank you.
So as we've been talking and I've seen out there, as you've been involved in a lot of different things, which is wonderful. But to get more of a sense of how you are in your community, what do you do in your community? Do you volunteer with who? I'm sure you're out and about everywhere. Just give us a good gist of, who you are, day in the life of kind of who Jessa is.
Frankly, I'm not able to do all the volunteering I want just as a single working mom, and that's something to where I think it's frustrating with. Often when you run for office, you need to have this resume of all the items that you do. And for a lot of folks who have to make major sacrifices in order to participate in the political process, it's hard for us to have that time to build the right resume because we're just trying to survive. A lot of time was spent, frankly, in Olympia last session trying to whip votes in order to get that done. So I have worked on political campaigns. I've done some small things as far as working with Earth Day Spokane. Have run several of those events. So it's less of an ongoing volunteer effort and more of a, whenever I can carve out time or something major comes up, such as Standing Rock, to where I'll head to be in support of that. But a lot of my time has just been, frankly, on surviving. And I'll say, like, running a campaign, actually 2 campaigns, and raising a child, that's quite a bit. And so I definitely understand the pressures that parents have and why it is so hard to get people in our age group to participate in the political process when they're just trying to keep a roof over their heads, in all honesty.
It's very true. The time it takes for what you're doing with the campaigns, it is insane, as we all are finding out and learning more about. But thank you very much. Anybody else have, yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I was looking on our live stream, and we have Jennifer Ferguson running for Senate, and she's also an endorsed Bernie-crat. And she wants to know how you feel about a base 12% tax with no cap.
I'll have to look more into what she's referring to there.
So her statement before was, yes, it is terrible having to fundraise. We have to raise money or be with voters. It is so much work to do both, little sleep and lots of work. And then she asks her question, how do you feel about a 12% tax with no cap? So
I would definitely like to look more into that before forming an opinion.
no problem. Thank you.
All right. Anybody? Yep.
I have a perception question. I have family in Eastern Washington, Spokane to Deer Park and Elk.
Yep.
So, and spent my life going back and forth. And so I have a healthy respect for gun rights. And then I'm kind of pleasantly surprised that not everybody, but a generalization of the further left, the progressive left, there's not a lot of hounding for taking guns away. And I think that the right has that fear, and that the farther left gets lumped in with the centrist left, where there is a lot of, we know what's best for you, so you do what we say. So do you think, is the perception, do people over there know that the progressives aren't trying to take guns away? Or do we get lumped into the centrist left?
I can only speak to my own experience. When I first announced, I got a lot of, you gun grabbing libtard, and my response would be, what do you mean when I grab my gun to go hunting or go to the range? And people were caught off guard and surprised that was my response. At the same time, I have the endorsement and the backing of the Moms Demand Action, Gun Sense candidate, and also the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Because I think ultimately the conversation's around safety. As someone who's hunted, my number one concern is some idiot in the field that doesn't know how to handle their gun and isn't being safe. As a mom, I'm concerned about my daughter going into someone's house with, who hasn't properly concealed or hasn't properly stored their weapon, and that's something to where I'm all for safety training, better implementation of the laws that we already have. And so with the exception of a few people in the beginning, I haven't had any issues or any problems with people not knowing where I stand and what I stand for. And actually the fact that I have a concealed carry permit is part of what's earned me the votes of several people who have never voted for a Democrat in their life. So I think that if we can get away from this, the conversation on the extremes and actually get down to what will respect people's rights and keep people safe, is exactly where we need to be. And I look forward to leading that conversation.
Excellent. And thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any more questions for Jessa? I don't think there's any more in the feed, is there? Let me just check real quick.
Think of off the top of my head. I'd like to know, though, real quick, of what sort of policy are you looking at enacting, or that you've been looking at in Congress right now, and how you'd like to proceed in getting those enacted?
Sorry, can you clarify?
I'd like to know what sort of policy you've been looking at or legislation you've been looking at that's in the works right now, and what you do to be able to help them.
Well, I think the two main ones at the state level that I'm going to be focusing and pushing on are three. The first one's the single payer trust for the healthcare system for the state. The second one is working with Patty Kuderer on the state bank that she's trying to move forward. The third one is the working families tax rebate in order to do a more immediate relief on families who are struggling to make it.
Great answer. Thank you.
All right. Any further? No. Okay, so what I would love for you to do is go ahead and, state who you are, what you're running for, a good blurb about, what you want people to remember about you out there, where they can find you and how they can help, whether it's volunteering or phone banking or whatever. Go ahead.
My name is Jessa Lewis. I'm the Democratic candidate for the state Senate in the 6th Legislative District. You can find me on electjessalewis.com or on social media at electjessalewis. Right now, we need small dollar donors, even if it's $6 a month. If you're able to chip in and help us with phone banking or knocking on doors, that would definitely be valuable. And also just getting the word out and sharing and letting people know that we do have a viable race in Eastern Washington. This is a true swing district. I just need to convince roughly 1,000 voters that I'm to vote for me that don't normally vote for Democrats. That's all it's going to take. It's 1,000 votes swing. And so would definitely appreciate all your support. The fact we only have, Democrats only have a 1-seat majority means that it's hard to get progressive legislation passed. So we need a stronger majority in order to get that done. Anything as far as that was the help, that was the how to connect with me. What were the other parts of the question?
I think you got it, actually, how they can help you, where they can find you, and who you were. So that was beautiful. Thank you so very much for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for watching and your questions out there. We'll see you next time.